Show.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. First thing this morning, the Donalds got the Twitter thumbs going fast and furious. It's a witch hunt! Witch hunt. Witch hunt seems to be the coined phrase that he wants to stick with. And again, there's a couple of things in the tweets that you just go, have you, what exactly have you been talking about? A couple of points in this. The first thing he tweets out is the Russian witch hunt is rapidly losing its credibility. House Intelligence Committee found no collusion, coordination, or anything else with Russia. Of course, you're talking about the Republican House Intel Committee. He goes on, so now the probe says, okay, what else is there? How about obstruction? For a made-up, phony crime, there is no O. It's called fighting back. I'm not quite sure what he's fighting back. Fighting back from the truth coming out, fighting back from the fact that there may have been no O, which I got to ask if that's what Stormy was saying. Lots of things in this. You just go, why? Why? Also, he tweets out there are 13 angry Democrats. No, those are all known as Republicans. Mueller all the way down. So you can say this one over and over. If you lie enough, maybe you can convince yourself, but not the rest of us who know that Mueller and all of them were actually Republicans. So let's square that right away. He says the 13 angry Democrats in charge of the Russian witch hunt are starting to find out that there is a court system in place that actually protects people from injustice. And just wait till the courts get to see your unrevealed conflicts of interest. And I'm going, the president of the United States threatening his citizens. I mean, at the end of this, this is what our media is supposed to do. It's supposed to investigate the people at the top. It's why the press is right there. The power of the press, First Amendment protection, which is why. And again, I look at this one piece of it. Just wait till the courts get to see your unrevealed conflicts of interest. This is a guy who's got tons of them. And the fear here is, and this is why I highlight this. The fear, I think, for him is that whatever Michael Cohen had on those 16 phones, whatever Michael Cohen had in reams of files, I'm sure there's a lot of conflict of interest with him sitting in our White House right now. I'm sure there are lots of Russian business deals that nobody ever knew about. I'm sure there's lots of interesting meetings and interesting conversations and back and forth that, well, we dropped the ball in 2016 and looking into. And at the end of it, I have a friend who is a media person in New York who says, we've known Trump has been a liar and a con man for a very long time. I mean, it's not new. This is who he is. It's just the rest of the country is now coming to the grips of, yeah, he's a liar and a con man. And again, I was screaming this all during the 2016 election. All you have to do is go back and listen to the Howard Stern tapes. I mean, because he was give him credit for being honest and being who he is, and for Stern being able to pull it out of him. But we completely, and I don't want to say missed it. I think we just ignored it. I think people just ignored it. But that's how we start the morning off. And hey, another week in as the Trump turns. So a good kickoff to the week. I'm excited about what the rest of the week is going to bring us, especially after a weekend of Rudy. And we'll get to some of that with Renato Mariotti later in the program. Lots to get to. We're going to talk trade. We're going to talk guns. We're going to talk the two, what are their names? Diamonds and Rust or Silk or Satin or something. We're going to talk about some of their quotes. Lots to get to. But first, something over the weekend just grabbed me. It was one of these moments where you're having a conversation with somebody and they completely miss the point. I have a weekend job where I do a little extra work, and the guy was complaining about the job. And I said, well, this is why you got to unionize. This is why you need a union here. Your health care is horrible. I can't imagine why anybody would stay because it's that bad. And he goes, well, we don't need no union. And I go, okay. He goes, look at what they did in West Virginia. And I'm going, what'd they do in West Virginia? Well, the teachers, they got a raise. I go, yeah, but are you guys willing to walk out on the picket line? And he's like, well, no. I'm going, well, that's what they did. And it got me thinking about this really bizarre world in which we are now living in, where, you've got truck drivers who are going, oh, see, well, look at the teachers did. They got in Arizona, they got a 20% raise. And it got the wheels spinning in my head going, we really don't quite understand in this country what unions do and why they're so important. And I was also reading an article over the weekend over at the New York Times that was talking about how, in places like West Virginia and Arizona and Oklahoma, and Kentucky, you had all of this grassroots organizing. And it just got me thinking that, there's a lot of opportunity at this moment to reach out to people like my acquaintance and educate them a little bit about why strong unions are really important. And as I was walking through this with him, I'm going, it comes down to the grassroots. It comes down to a militant workforce. The reason my grandparents' generation built what they built and the way they were able to build it is because they had massive class solidarity. They all stuck together. When one place went on strike, another one went on a sympathy strike, which is now obviously illegal thanks to the law, thanks to Taft-Hartley. But they all understood that when one workplace does better, the other one should too. And if they don't, they make it happen. And this is where, I was having this conversation with this guy and I'm going, look, it used to be when I first started in the freight business that when the master freight agreement companies, when they got a raise, the whole industry got a raise. It raised everybody up. Everybody did better. The union rate was the industry rate because the companies that didn't have unions didn't want them and said, you know what, we're going to treat our employees well. We're going to give them comparable benefits and comparable wages so that our employees don't go, hey, we want what they've got. That makes a lot of sense. And I've always said, if you don't want a union in your workplace, treat your workers well. Pretty simple. But yet you look around this country and the fact that unemployment is below 4% for the first time since the Clinton years, and yet wages are deadlined. And actually still, not just stagnant, but in a lot of industries, still falling behind the inflation rate. And you go, how is that possible? It's possible because you have no bargaining power. And common sense says in states that have strong collective bargaining laws for public sector workers, especially teachers, cops, and firefighters, they don't get cheated all along the way. And if you look at West Virginia, you look at Kentucky, you look at Arizona, you look at Oklahoma, these are states where public sector workers have been dying on the vine because they haven't had the ability to fight for those better wages, hours, and conditions. So you have weaker unions, you have weaker pay. You have stronger unions, you have stronger pay. That's the simple math in this. It isn't that difficult. But yet, we seem to think somehow magic is going to happen and the benevolent employer is going to give us wonderful things, and it just doesn't happen. And I keep coming back to this reality that if you want to have good wages, good conditions, you have to bargain for it. And what we learned from Wisconsin, and again, this is another one of those, Wisconsin is like the test case for what the Republicans want to do to this entire country. In 2011, when Scott Walker went and they rammed through Act 10 like thieves in the night. I think it was like 2 in the morning when I woke up for it, as we were sleeping on the marble floors in the Capitol. When they did that, when they took away bargaining rights, when they basically said, hey, open shop for everybody, and the unions lost a big portion of their membership. Wages, hours, conditions got worse. And then when they rammed through this, you have to recertify every year. Unions became weaker. And guess what happened? Wages, hours, conditions got worse. Now on the other side of this, there are some places where the unions actually got stronger because they realized, we've eventually got to come back together. And they've done that. And in those places, they've done fairly well. So the message in this for me is that by having a much more militant workforce, by having people like, folks we've talked to from Oklahoma and folks we've talked to from Arizona and from Kentucky and West Virginia, when you have we have nothing left to lose. We've been starved for a generation. There's nothing left for us to lose. We have to fight. And this is where a Republican mindset, this is where that conservative corporate ideology is going to, I think, be dangerous long term. And this is why I think the unions of AFSCME and SEIU aren't in total despair. They know at some point people are going to be like, hey, there's only so much of you-know-what I'm willing to eat, and there's only so much more I can lose. Desperation breeds action. The old labor saying of sometimes your stomach has to be empty before your head gets right. This is what we're seeing in those states. And the question is, do we want to see that across the country? Do you want to see the kind of protests that we've seen in places like Oklahoma or Arizona? Do you want to see this? Now, for me, this is where 2018 comes into play. 2018 gives Democrats an opportunity to take back the House and maybe even the Senate to start building for a future of, hey, we're going to reform labor laws. We're going to go through and we're going to pass something that's going to encourage people to join and form unions. We're going to shore up collective bargaining. We're going to move forward and give people an opportunity to live that American dream. That ideal of work hard, play by the rules, get ahead. We're going to make that a reality. And we're going to update those labor laws, because understand, you're talking about laws that are 70 plus years old. They didn't have a gig economy back in the 30s and 40s. They didn't have all this automation and all this stuff going on. We've got to figure out how our labor laws benefit workers in this era, which is why, again, I ask every candidate, what's your policy on labor law? What's your policy on workers bargaining? What's your policy on making sure that workers get protections? What's your policy on changing the independent contractor rules? There's tons of things that we need to be doing right now. And look, we have got to figure out how, as a society, we come back to the understanding that the working class of this country needs to come back together and pursue policies that are good for them. I mean, we've got a Congress and a White House and a judiciary that's really pro-business right now. We just gave almost $2 trillion away in tax cuts. What did you get? And I've every person I ask who collects a paycheck, I ask, hey, how much of that tax cut did you get? How much have you seen in your paycheck? Was it the $1.50 a week that Paul Ryan said? And most of them don't even know that if they got that. That's the sad reality. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, going to be here to share some of his thoughts on trade, on jobs, on China, and much more. Quick break. Right back.
Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day animators struck Fleischer Studios in New York City. It was the industry's first strike. Creators of Popeye the Sailor Man and Betty Boop were fed up with working conditions at Fleischer. They were sick of the long hours, low pay, no paid sick leave, or even vacation time. Some had worked years without a day off. As well, they resented having to ask permission to use the bathroom. Animation workers wanted better working conditions and medical insurance. 2 animators had recently died of tuberculosis, and workers linked their deaths to poor ventilation in the studio. They had been trying to organize with the Commercial Artists and Designers Union for over a year. 2 leading animators were fired for union activity a month earlier, and another 13 were fired when the union approached the studio demanding their reinstatement, union recognition, wage increases, and benefits. In his book, Drawing the Line, Tom Cito writes that picketers were soon marching on Broadway singing, "We're Popeye the Union Man. We'll fight to the finish because we can't live on spinach." One picket sign read, "I make millions laugh, but the real joke is my salary." Strikers received support from the Screen Actors Guild. The Musicians Union refused to provide soundtracks for the studio, and many union projectionists refused to show Fleischer cartoons across the country. The AFL organized a boycott of Paramount Pictures, which financed the studio, and area longshoremen frequently joined the picket lines. After 5 months, the studio finally caved, granting the strikers' demands. But the victory was short-lived. Fleischer made moves to relocate to Florida within a year, in part to bust their union. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the big numbers on Friday for manufacturing. Evidently 166,000 new jobs in the month of April, down from what was expected of 191,000. Also, the creation of 24,000 new manufacturing jobs, which is a good thing in my view. And look, there's part of me that goes, this is part of the talk of tariffs. Part of the talk of bringing jobs back. And on Friday, Donald Trump tweeted out, "Our high-level delegation is on its way back from China, where they had held long meetings with Chinese leaders and business representatives. We will be meeting tomorrow to determine the results. But it is hard for China in that they have become very spoiled with U.S. trade wins." And here to talk a little bit about that, I've asked our good friend Scott Paul. He's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, to come talk with us. Scott, thanks for taking time.
Hey, Rick. How are you doing?
I am good. So what do we think of the delegation? What do you think of a spoiled China?
Well, I tell you, I was not optimistic that there'd be some deal. In fact, if there was a deal, I think it'd probably be a bad one. Kind of a face-saving thing where China said, "We'll buy a few more airplanes and you'll take the tariffs off." So I give credit to Ambassador Lighthizer, Secretary Ross, the rest of them for hanging tough. I think that was important, and I do think that the list of U.S. demands was leaked out on Friday,
right?
And it was long, and I know reporters looked at it and said, "Oh my God, China's never going to do all of this stuff." But I will also say, Rick, that it's stuff that you have been probably talking about for the last decade, that I have been talking about for the last decade. And the challenge has been that no one's really kind of put their foot down and said, China, you got to do this. President Obama took some selective measures, but, there was never kind of a full frontal attack on unfair trade practices. And so I think that list probably came as a shock to both China and to observers who were like, "Oh my God, this looks so unreasonable." And yet, when you dig into the demands, I'll be honest, every one of those things are things that China should be doing already.
I agree.
So it's the end game. But I don't know how this plays out. There's going to be public hearings about the tariff list that the United States published, and there'll be a process there, and we're still weeks away from any sort of trade war outside of the steel tariffs, which are already in place. But we got a long way to go, and Trump tweeted out trade wars are easy to win. Look, I don't agree with that.
No.
I think it's like a chess match. I think it takes a lot of sophisticated maneuvering. I do like Bob Lighthizer. I think he's very capable. When he was U.S. Steel's trade attorney, he was very effective at trying to keep steel imports out of the U.S. market. And so, hopefully, it's not kind of Trump's whim where he's saying, well, I want this, that, or the other thing. And Lighthizer will be able to work some magic, but at the end of the day, this is about our jobs. This is about our manufacturing jobs in particular, and it's about the jobs of the future. Not just the jobs we already have, but we're going to be competing to make advanced vehicles, bioengineered products, all this stuff that's going to come online. There's going to be a fierce competition for it, and I'd like those jobs to be in the United States.
I agree with you, but here's the thing, and as you pointed out, the list of demands were fairly long, and I think this is a lesson for Democrats. And I'll be honest with you, I don't like giving Trump credit for anything, but I will when I think he's on the right path. If you look at that list of demands, you start off with all of your demands. And then you work your way back. You then take things off the table. It's basic negotiating. Sadly, what Democrats sometimes do is we start off with what we want and what we'll settle for, and then work our way back. Instead of going, hey, we want the sun, the moon, we want the oceans, we want it all, and then working your way back. We go, we'll take this, and then we end up with a lot less than we wanted.
Yeah. I think what analysts like, and certainly people who are looking at trade and the markets, they like certainty. They don't like
Sure.
shock, instability, chaos, and that's what Trump gives you. And I'll be, a lot of times that doesn't work. I think it's, I think it's really disruptive. That's no way to run a country, right? But I do think that keeping them guessing in trade negotiations is not a bad thing, because we have been so predictable. It's like, the U.S. script. You're right, Rick. Let's go in. We're going to want to announce some deal at the end of this. So let's be prepared to take a couple of things, and even to keep on talking with China as one of them. China knows this. I mean, the Chinese negotiators are fierce as well, and they've played the United States like a fiddle, whether it was during the Bush administration or the Obama administration, and they were able to run out the clock on all of this stuff. And so I tend to agree with you that while trade reporters will be like, oh my God, look at the shock, it's roiling the markets, it's causing all this instability, businesses don't know, I think maybe for the case of these trade negotiations, that's what you need to kind of shake up the status quo.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let me ask you this, because I'm getting a lot of flack from people going, I believe in fair and free trade, and these tariffs are going to kill jobs, and all the stuff that we've heard. And I've been kicking back and going, the sad reality is the Koch brothers and their ilk, who have been funding universities across the country to put their economics professors, and have trained an entire generation to think that having any tariffs or any protective measures of our industry is a horrible thing, and it's going to be destructive, and it's going to be the end of the world. And I go, but what happens when we lose the entire steel industry or the entire aluminum industry? What then happens? And there's never an answer for that.
No, there's not, because there is not a good answer. In the textbook, it's like, well, China, other countries, they'll make the steel and we'll make the computer chips. And we'll have, we'll be doing, have comparative advantage and all of this, and everybody will be better off. The fact is, and I mean, Puerto Rico is just a petri dish for this. If you're completely dependent on manufacturing or supplies from outside of your own territory, you face real risks. You face real risks, and we're seeing that every day in Puerto Rico. And so the other aspect of this is that if you then get all the U.S. producers out, and it's mostly China and some other countries that are dominating it, they control the price. They totally control the price, and then all the steel consumers who are worried about the tariffs now, they should be more worried when it's other countries that are setting the price for steel. I think that you want a domestic supply, you want a diverse set of suppliers, and you want suppliers that are close to home, and supplies that aren't impacted by shipping problems or global commodity spikes or exchange rate differences. So all of this to me indicates that it's a good thing economically for even steel consumers to have steel made in the United States. So the economists, they can't play this game out because they'll say, well, that'll never happen.
Yeah, no, I mean,
happen.
It's one thing to put it on a piece of paper when you're talking about rice and beans. It's another thing to be talking about steel and aluminum, especially when you add in the component of national security. If we no longer make steel and aluminum, you can't have a war. Well, maybe that's actually a good thing. Maybe we do away with steel and aluminum when we're no longer a war society.
Yeah, I was like, look around you. You can't look probably more than 10 feet without seeing something made out of steel or aluminum in your life, right? And not that I ever want to see us engage in conflict, but having a deterrence is very important. And so those Virginia-class submarines that patrol the oceans, they're made out of steel. They're going to be our attack class submarines until 2050, right? I mean, we might have people on Mars by then, but we're still going to be making our submarines out of steel. So this idea that we're moving on and steel is part of the past is ridiculous. Obviously, there's a diversity of materials. Obviously, we're making technological advances. The steel industry is as well. They make high-strength, lightweight steel that didn't even exist 15 years ago. So the times are a-changing. They're changing with it, but it was a proud part of our past, it's part of our present, and it's got to be part of our future as well.
I'm with you, and those jobs have got to be good jobs as well, and not just jobs. They need to be good union jobs with good wages and benefits and all of that. And I go back to this. The manufacturing jobs are up and great, 24,000 in the month of April. But I keep I want to see the numbers on what kind of jobs are these? Are these more minimum wage, $10 an hour, or are these good paying union jobs with health care and retirement and security?
Yeah, so it is it's a mixed bag. I'll be honest with you, because you're seeing much more temporary and staffing agency work in the manufacturing sector, which to me is just shocking, but it's there. You're seeing some of this manufacturing job creation in right-to-work states. You're seeing some in the traditional kind of industrial heartland as well. But there still is a manufacturing wage premium. There still is a premium for benefits in manufacturing, where you're much more likely to have company-provided health care than you are in some other sectors. But it's not the way it used to be, and you touched on that. And I do think that that's something that employers are going to have to grapple with. So many of them say, well, I can't find anybody who wants to come to work. I'm like, well, look, if you were expecting them to have a certification in welding or industrial maintenance or electrical work and come fully trained and to have to pick up the bill for that and then be willing to work for like $12 an hour, you need to wake up and understand kind of where wages are or where they need to be in this country today. And employers need to have skin in the game.
No, I'm with you.
Those employers who are investing in their workforce and who do realize the value of a partnership with their workers through unions, they tend to be more productive. They have better pipelines. They have fewer issues with respect to filling vacancies, and that kind of collaboration does pay off.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You talk about the wages, and across the economy, wages should be going up. I mean, as unemployment is 3.9%, the last time unemployment was 3.9%, I think the local McDonald's in my neighborhood was paying almost double the minimum wage.
Yeah, right. I mean, there was a story about a community in Indiana, where I'm from, in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, Elkhart, Indiana. Elkhart was one of the hardest hit communities in the Great Recession. They had over 20% unemployment. It's where a lot of the recreational vehicles are made in the United States. And today, the unemployment rate is almost unmeasurable. And some fast food joints, because they won't up their wages, sometimes they don't open in the morning because they don't have enough workers. And it is just, I mean, it's like, how can you be so stubborn, right? How can you be so stubborn? It's like, raise the wages. People will come. They will, they'll relocate for jobs if there's going to be jobs. But they have to be jobs where they can at least cover their cost of living, and also hopefully put a little bit away for retirement and sending their kids to school, and maybe even a vacation. I mean, they're not asking for much.
Right.
They're just asking for to kind of climb on the ladder that can get them to the American dream.
No, I'm with you, but it comes back to the wages, hours, conditions. But here again, I was just reading a study put out by the Goldwater Institute. I don't know if you've seen this, but they were saying that a single mother working a minimum wage job cannot be in poverty in the U.S. Because we give earned income tax credit money and all kinds of handouts. And I'm going, people don't want that. People want to earn a decent living.
They do, yeah. Yeah, absolutely they do. And I do think some states are coming to grips with the fact that it is not just about providing access to a training or a job opportunity. It's also providing what some people call the wraparound services. Like, what about daycare? Daycare can be very expensive. What about transportation costs? Especially if gas prices are up or there's limited public transportation. How do you manage that? And so I do think there's some communities, some agencies, some employers who are putting all of these pieces together, but unfortunately they seem to be the exceptions rather than the rule. And those researchers aren't kind of living in that kind of nickel and dime environment where you have to watch everything. It's not it's not an enviable place to be, but everybody everybody I know has some grit and determination and wants to have that opportunity and wants to have that ability to have kind of a career ladder in place for them as well, and they're going to work hard. There's no question in my mind they will.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that work hard, play by the rules, get ahead thing that I grew up believing in. Last line of questioning I've got for you. Back to the trade deal, back to the with China. One of the things Trump has said he wants to do, and what the administration says they want to do, is they want to cut the trade deficit by $200 billion by 2020. I guess last year we had a $375 billion trade deficit. Do you think that's a possible goal? I mean, it's something I would love to see, and I would love to see us have some kind of balance in our trade. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, it is. I would say it's unlikely, and there is so I take kind of a middle ground on the trade deficit. So, some economists say, well, the trade deficit has nothing to do with trade policies. It has everything to do with the savings rate in a country. All right, and so. I think it is impacted by the savings rate, because if you're consuming more stuff, you're likely to be consuming imports, and that's going to increase your trade deficit. I think the trade deficit is also impacted by our exchange rate. Like, if the dollar is worth more, we're going to be selling fewer goods overseas. We're going to be importing more goods. If the dollar's worth a little less, we're going to be selling more goods overseas. We're going to be importing a little fewer products, and that will lower the trade deficit. And then I do think it's about trade policies and reciprocity, where if you are able to knock down unfair trade barriers overseas, and if you do have an approach where you're being reciprocal rather than just having zero tariffs on everything, I think you can get towards balance. The thing that is going to be really disruptive is, this tax cut that was put into place, is going to increase borrowing, increase debt, lower the savings rate again for kind of everybody, and it's going to be hard to work down that trade deficit. I think it's a goal worth having. I think there should be some objective criteria. I think that one of the easiest ways to do that is to achieve kind of a currency accord where China agrees to raise the value of its currency substantially, and that would have almost an immediate impact on the trade deficit, in addition to the other knocking down the other barriers they have in place. So
yeah, because if you remember, Donald Trump said day one, currency manipulator, going to happen, day one.
Yeah, well, he hadn't yet, and he's not. Bush didn't, Obama didn't. Trump was much more brazen about saying I'm going to name them and backed off in kind of typical Trumpian fashion. But when push comes to shove at some point in time, and China threatened to devalue the currency going into the trade negotiations to send a lesson to the U.S. negotiators. I think that if they're going to do that, we ought to restrict their ability to buy U.S. Treasuries. Right? And to do things like that, I think there has to be some consequence for behavior that is not market based at all.
Yeah, good. Yeah, we got to do something because not only are they eating our lunch, they're buying the bags and the stuff that we put into the lunch.
Yeah, everything. Right. Yeah, they are doing everything. And look, I don't believe in a fortress America where we are not trading internationally. I think trade can be an amazing thing.
Agreed.
But two things are clear. The rules have to be fairer to workers and give the opportunity to workers to be lifted up here and overseas. And we should insist on reciprocity. And those ought to be kind of the golden rules that define our trade policy.
I'm right there with you. As I always say, I'm not an isolationist. I don't have a big giant moat around my house. But when I do leave, I do lock the door. So that I have a say of who comes in and comes out. I think we need to be thinking about that as well. Scott, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts. Good stuff. Thanks.
You bet. Happy Monday to you, Rick.
You as well. Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. You want to check that out. Lots of good information, lots of good stuff there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1907. That was the day known in the San Francisco labor movement as Bloody Tuesday. In the early 20th century, San Francisco was a city with a strong union movement. In early May, the Carmen's Union called a strike against United Railroads, the company that ran the city's transit system. 1,500 Carmen walked off the job, demanding an 8-hour workday and a $3 per day wage. The strike began on a Sunday. The city's transit lines stood silent. The next day, tensions began to mount. The company put up barbed wire around the car barns. Strikers believed this was in preparation to get the streetcars back up and running. Strikers and supporters gathered around the car barns. The day passed with nothing happening. But the next morning, as picketers gathered, 6 cars rolled out of the barns. Hired guns rode with the scab drivers. Angry picketers attempted to stop the streetcars, bombarding them with bricks and stones. Gunfire erupted between the armed company guards and the picketers. 2 picketers were killed in the hail of gunfire. Many more were injured. But this bloody day was not the end of the injuries. It's estimated that 24 people were killed in accidents while scab drivers operated the streetcars. Strikes by public transportation workers were often some of the most contested work actions to take place in big cities. These workers had the ability to impact work sites far beyond their own since they transported laborers to work. The magnitude of a transportation strike would ripple throughout a city, and these strikes were often met with fierce resistance. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Yeah, this one's for the workers who toil night and day, by hand and by brain, to earn your pay, who for centuries on past for no more than your bread, have bled for your...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So, on Friday, Trump tweeted out, just out, 3.9% unemployment. 4 is broken. In meantime, witch hunt. And I'm going, witch hunt? Witch hunt? Got to throw that out there. You know what? It's not a witch hunt? People trying to support their families. You know what's interesting? Why is no one talking about the fact that you were in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, before the tax scheme got rammed through, promising $4,000 for everybody? Because I keep asking people, did you get your $4,000 Trump prize? Did it come in the mail? Did you get that check we were promised? Everyone was going to get $4,000. In fact, wages were going to skyrocket. I'm not seeing it. Wages were going to go up. Still not seeing it. $4,000. Where is it? I think the most I've heard someone say is they got like $10 that they noticed. And you go, but. And the thing is, as I think about it, the last time the unemployment rate was officially this low, the fast food joints in my neighborhood were paying double the minimum wage. Double, because there were so few workers. And this is, when you talk about economic theory, this is supposedly, the law of supply and demand. As demand increases and supply shrinks, the costs of wages should go up. Where are the pay hikes? I know we just gave away nearly $2 trillion to the wealthy and big businesses. But what about the working people? And, in talking about trade with Scott, I mean, we have created a trade regime in this country that, we keep getting screwed. We're losing industry after industry. And I come back to this because I think it's really important. I took an economics course 30 years ago. It was a lot different than the economics courses that you take today. In my view, in that we're now teaching that unions are bad. We're now teaching that barriers are really, really bad and that free trade is great. And look, I learned about the rice and beans. And I'm sure everybody who's taken economics and, learned about the rice and beans, country A, B, and C, A makes all the rice, B makes all the beans, and C gets as much as they want. I mean, it works great on a piece of paper. But what country C makes the bowls. So what happens when country A makes the rice, the beans, and the bowls? What happens to B and C? Well, they're at the mercy of country A, and this is sadly where our trade deficits have taken us, in my view. $375 billion with China alone last year. What that means is we bought $375 billion worth of stuff more from them than they bought from us. Very simple. But having the reserved currency means that money comes back here, comes back to us. And what does it mean? It means they're not buying our stuff. They're literally buying us. They're buying more companies. They're buying our treasury bonds. They're buying, they're buying our land. Eventually, if it continues, and now this is down the road, but eventually, if we continue down this path, eventually we could have no more United States of America. It could be the United States of America owned by China. We can still live here, but we have to pay them rent. Let that sink in for a second, because that's how big our trade deficit is and how big it's growing. And if you look at in just a very short period of time from permanent normal trade relations during the Clinton years till now, you're talking a very short time in history. We went from the world's largest producer of goods to now we're close. We went from the bridge in Trenton, Trenton makes, the world takes, to sorry, our factories are closed because a Chinese company bought it and moved the factory over to China. And for me, there's got to be some leveler that says, you know what, we have balance of trade. And I know back during the 40s, John Maynard Keynes came up with the idea of having a basket of currencies that would punish countries with high trade surpluses. And at some point, you've got to talk about that balance to where you don't have, just one giant sucking up everything. At some point, you've got to be talking about some bit of balance. And be it with, I don't know, trade barriers, be it with currency, fines. Because his idea back then was the idea of creating an international currency, something he wanted to call the Bancor. And we said, no, we want to have the reserve currency, please. And he said, look, if country A has a huge trade surplus and country B has a huge deficit, country A will pay country B to where they're at level playing field. And then country B will be able to either invest in industry or to innovate and make new industry so that, they can, get further better off, or transfer payments so that people don't suffer, so that you don't have Appalachia, so that you don't have kids going to bed hungry every night, so that you don't have people who are uninsured, so you don't have people who are homeless because they can't find jobs. And if you look at 2016, there were a lot of those people. Now, I know there are a lot of folks saying 2016 went the way it did because, we're a bunch of racist, homophobic, xenophobic, and misogynist people, and that maybe some of that is true. But understand the pain and reality of middle America who lost their identity when the factory left town is very real as well. And over the weekend, the New York Times had an interesting article, talking about, the Obama voters who voted for Trump. Someone who voted for Obama twice and then ended up going to Trump. And I guess there were more than 650 counties across this country that did that, voted for Obama twice and then flipped to Trump because, and a lot of people are saying, and this report says that as well, is they wanted someone who cared about them. They wanted someone who was going to shake things up to, maybe bring back the local factory. And they bought into, hey, you know what? We might get that factory back. It may come back. They bought into the fact that there was this billionaire guy, this really rich guy, cared about them in their $13 or $14 or $20 an hour job. A little insight? He doesn't. But they bought it. They bought the line. And, you go through all of the comments that these folks were making, saying, look, we just want a job that we're going to be able to feed our kids. We just want to have a future that we're going to be able to support our family, put a roof over their heads, food on the table, clothes on their back, not worrying about, hey, am I going to be evicted tomorrow? And I think that's what everybody wants. And, earlier I cited this report done by the Goldwater Institute, which is now saying, according to them, because of Gerald Ford and Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan, no single mother with children can possibly be poor and live below the poverty line if she's working a 40-hour minimum wage job. It's just not possible, according to the Goldwater Institute. And you go, okay, well, who pays for childcare? Who pays for health care? Who pays for the clothing? Who pays for $725? Not a lot of money. But their argument is there are these transfer payments, and we give earned income tax credit money. And while that helps, sorry, that's not what people want. Sorry, that single mother doesn't want to have to go through the whole process of applying for school lunch programs, applying for LIHEAP, going through the obstacles of getting food stamps, leaping the tall buildings of CHIP and healthcare. I mean, at the end of this, you can work a 40-hour week just trying to access some of these programs because they've put so many roadblocks in the way. And that's by design, so that people don't, so you just go without. And I keep coming back to Trump promised $4,000 a year in people's paychecks if they got to do this tax game. I remember him. There's a big semi in the backdrop, big truck, and he was $4,000. It's coming. Again, not here, not happening. And the question is, and the question this article raised is, how do Democrats get those voters back? And I asked this the day after the election in 2016. I said, okay, Democrats, you lost. What are you going to do with that anger? That's very real. That's very palpable. That people who've lost their, not just lost their jobs, but lost their identities. How do you bring that anger somewhere constructive? Okay, Trump figured out how to make them, rile them up, tick them off, and make them want to smash things. How do we make them want to build things? And what's the vision? And this is the question for Democrats going forward. What's the vision? How do we, put a chicken in every pot, or a Chevy in every driveway, or how do we make sure people's lives get better? That's the ultimate question. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Time to talk.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, has reappointed 83-year-old Mahmoud Abbas as president, just days after Abbas drew international criticism for saying European Jews brought the Holocaust upon themselves because of their social professions as bankers. In addition to backing Abbas, the PLO parliament forestalled any discussion of a succession plan, something experts say will pose a major challenge upon Abbas's death or resignation, given sharp tensions between Abbas's Fatah movement in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. The ruling party of Malaysia has begun wielding a newly passed fake news law against the country's political opposition ahead of closely watched elections. 92-year-old Mahathir Mohamad hopes to unseat scandal-plagued Prime Minister Najib Razak on May 9th, but he now finds himself under investigation for alleging his private plane used to ferry him to campaign events may have been sabotaged, causing him to miss key rallies. According to the Anti-Fake News Act of 2018, those judged by the government to have spread wholly or partly false claims can be jailed for up to 6 years. And the number of Americans choosing to install residential solar panels on their homes is increasing, and the average income of those adopters is declining. Those findings, published this week by the Clean Energy States Alliance, signal that a previous trend of solar adoption only by America's wealthiest households is starting to change. Galen Barbos is a research scientist focused on electricity markets at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory.
Annual trends show that PV adopter incomes have been falling and converging towards the median income for the broader population.
But that convergence will take some more time. The average median household income of those installing solar panels is $92,000 a year, some 17% higher than the median income of all owner-occupied houses in the United States. Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. So, interesting article someone sent me the other day about in Indiana, evidently there was a U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement raid, an ICE raid, that ended up netting 8 undocumented workers and taking them away. And it's sparked some outrage in the area because people are saying, hey, you know, why are you going after these people who are working and not the contractor? You know, why not go after the contractor? How is it that you didn't do anything to them? And the quote was from this guy, Dewey Pearman, who's the executive director of the Construction Advancement Foundation of Northwest Indiana. And he said, look, when I saw the article, my first question was, why isn't somebody not knocking on the door of the contractor asking for certified payroll information, asking how these folks get paid? He said, I almost guarantee there is zero possibility that these individuals are being paid what they should be getting paid. He said, look, I'm not critical of the workers. They have to do what they have to do. They have to do what they need to do to feed their family. They work very, very hard. It's the employers who are committing the crime. And again, I keep coming back to this. You know, you have, and I hear this from people all the time. Wow, you know, we got all these illegals. And I'm going, you know, they're here just trying to feed their family. They're doing what any one of us would be doing if we found ourselves in similar situations. I guarantee it. We would be doing the exact same thing. The illegal part here is these contractors, especially when you're talking about in the construction industry. You know, they pay them under the table. And the worst part of all this, and this is why I've always said, you know, this is why you need to have strong unions to make sure that people get protections. What ends up happening, and I've heard this case, you know, time and time again. What ends up happening is they pay them under the table. As soon as they get hurt, as soon as they start making, you know, complaints about, hey, you cheated me out of wages. Hey, this isn't what we agreed on. Hey, this is too low. Hey, I want more. You know, anytime any of that squawking from those peasant workers rises up, they call in ICE to come take them away. So by having these people in the shadows, now follow me here because this is important. By having these folks in the shadows who are exploitable like this, not to mention that, you know, the contractors are cheating on paying unemployment, they're cheating on paying workers' compensation, they're cheating on paying state taxes, on federal taxes, they're cheating all the way around, while cheating the worker out of wages. By having that scenario and having these folks in the shadows, afraid that ICE is going to come get them, it pulls the entire industry down for everybody else. Because if you have an exploitable, desperate class of workers in any industry, I don't care what it is, you end up with a scenario where, hey, guess what? Everybody is now worse off. And this is one of those things that we used to know. You know, we used to, go back to the old Knights of Labor saying that, you know, an injury to one is an injury to all. Hello. This is exactly what's happened instead. And this is the bizarre part of this to me, because I talk to people all the time. They're going, those illegals. I go, which illegals? Are you talking about the white guy in the office who hired them and didn't bother checking on it and is cheating them? Is that who we're talking about? And the answer is always no. Are you talking about the CEO of the big company? Are you talking about the local management? Evidently not, because we should be locking them up. But here again, this is what happens when you have dysfunctional immigration policy and you have just this insane polarization. There's a way forward on immigration in this country. We need a young generation of work. We need workers coming in to do jobs that Americans won't. And I'm sorry, that's reality. There are farmers in our area who are struggling to get people to pick their crops. There are thousands of jobs that, sorry, just not seeing a lot of people who look like me doing. And even if the wages went up, I doubt you would see it. We have got to have something of a sane immigration policy, because you do need to have fresh blood coming in. You do need to have young workers coming in. You do need to have that, and because we've always had that. And I always get a kick out of people saying, well, my family came here the right way. And I go, how exactly is that? They came on the boat. Yeah, they got on a boat and they showed up at the door. No one invited them. No one said, hey, come on over. They didn't pre-certify. They got on a boat and they showed up, much like the caravan coming through Mexico. They're fleeing horrible conditions and saying, please, I want to go to the place where I may have an opportunity, where I can feed my kids, where I can have a chance at a future for them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Should we be locking up the CEOs? Should we be going after the management, the contractor? Should the contractor be responsible for having 8 undocumented workers on his roofing project? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1867. That was the day that shoemakers founded the labor union, the Knights of St. Crispin, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. St. Crispin is the patron saint of cobblers. In the 3rd century A.D., Crispin and his brother traveled what would become France, preaching the gospel. They paid their way by cobbling shoes. They were martyred for their faith and were venerated as saints by the Catholic Church. By selecting this name, the fledgling union connected with a proud heritage of shoemaking. After the Civil War, the shoemaking industry was changing in the United States. A trade that had long been practiced by skilled craftsmen increasingly became industrialized in large shops and factories. The union was formed in response to these changes, and it quickly grew. The lodge, started in Chicago, quickly enlisted some 600 members. Within the first year, there were 87 lodges, mostly in the Northeast and Midwest. Within 5 years, there were between 40,000 and 60,000 members in nearly 400 lodges. The Knights had become the largest trade union in the United States. To keep members informed, they published a monthly journal. They fought hard against wage decreases and worked diligently to stop the hiring of green hands or unskilled labor in the shoemaking trade. This effort was not successful, as shoes became increasingly mass-produced. In 1872, a strike by some of the Eastern St. Crispin lodges was brutally crushed. A nationwide depression that started in 1873 further eroded the union's strength. The numbers fell to only about a third of the union's previous strength. Yet, through defeat, the Knights had demonstrated the potential of nationwide trade union organizing. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters @LaborHistoryIn2.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left, rain shed a farm red. Father, son, left to carry on, blue denim, hell is fate. He's a working class man.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So evidently yesterday, Rudy, on what was really an amazing weekend of Rudy everywhere, making the justification or making stuff up all the way around, I would have loved to have seen his media schedule. Anyway, he met with Trump at the National Golf Club in Virginia, and it just gives me this image of, the rich guy naked in the steam room, scheming and plotting on how to get out of the trouble that they've caused. Just really just amazing to me. And here to share some of his thoughts on, the weekend of Rudy, the revelations that have spewed out of his mouth, and if Manny, Mo, and Jack would have been better attorneys than Rudy Giuliani. I've asked Renato Mariotti to come talk with us. He was a former prosecutor, also a former candidate for Illinois Attorney General, and one of the great legal minds of our time. Renato, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely, anytime.
So, what were your thoughts? If you were in Trump's shoes, would you want Rudy running around spewing as he's been?
No, it's really interesting to me because I'll tell you, in any investigation, you typically have a team of lawyers working together. They are very careful about what they say publicly. Every statement is very, well thought out. And it doesn't really look anything like this. What this looks like to me is, Rudy winging it as he goes along, constantly clarifying his statements, changing things, occasionally from time to time. Definitely not the sort of discipline that attorneys usually have. It's very, very unusual.
It's kind of the spaghetti theory. We'll throw it against the wall, see what sticks. But let me ask you this: could this be, because part of what Trump does is just throw so much out there that you're just inundated by it, to where then actual facts and actual reality are nowhere to be found. Could this just be we're gonna throw as much chaos at you as possible, so that you just cloud and make the waters as murky as possible?
I mean, certainly that's what's happening. But unfortunately, at times Giuliani said things that are so obviously problematic that it's really unclear how you can spin them in a positive way. I mean, for instance, the payment, to these various women is, fairly easy to explain as something that's not campaign related. I actually think that's one of the weaker charges against Trump, and yet, because obviously there are a lot of reasons why men don't want their wives to know that they're cheating.
Sure.
Rudy nonetheless, did a very good job of explaining why this was so important for the campaign, right? He made the statement that, oh God, can you imagine what would have happened if this came out before the last debate? I mean, it's really the sort of thing that you'd expect, a critic of the president to say, not his own attorney. So that's really what is just hard for me to understand, and I think it's why you saw, I think, a fairly unusual, action by the president's attorney there, which is to literally issue a correction to his own statements from the day earlier. I mean, typically what attorneys do is, very carefully plan out their statements so, there's no correction, because everything they're saying is carefully calculated to move the investigation forward.
Yeah, but Rudy's new to the job, so, he'll get around to it.
Well, he's new to the job, but, the crazy thing is, people forget, yes, Rudy Giuliani was a mayor, et cetera, but, he was the lead prosecutor in New York.
Yep.
Very important, probably the most
took down the
important.
mob.
Yeah, absolutely, and also a man who had a high-ranking job in the Justice Department. So really, somebody who you would expect to know his stuff. When Trump brought him on, I'm like, okay, well, he finally has somebody who's competent to quarterback a case like this. But it really seems to me like instead of digging in and really understanding the facts of this case, which is what you would expect an attorney to do, you have him just kind of trying to wing it.
Yeah, but there's part of me that goes, he understands the facts really well, which is why he's making the, what's that old saying? If the facts are against you, just slam your fist on the table. There's part of me that goes, that's what he's doing. He's just slamming his fist on the table.
Well, unfortunately for him, Trump has so many complicated legal problems that I just don't think that's enough to work. I mean, a lot of times there's defense attorneys who just sort of wing it, and that's okay if you're facing a simple assault charge or something. But here we've got the president of the United States facing legal battles on a multitude of fronts.
Right.
He really needs very sophisticated legal help, because he's in a spot where he's running out of really good options left to him. I mean, it looks very much like he's going to have to testify before Mueller. He is going to be very hard, I think, at this point for him to escape a deposition in the Stormy Daniels case. So, that generates real peril for him, and a lot of downside, not only legally but politically. So he really deserves to have better counsel than he has, and it really makes you wonder, if he is as wealthy as he claims to be, why he can't buy better counsel than he has.
Well, I think it's very clear. I mean, he's not going to listen to his attorney. I mean, would you take him on as a client, given the fact that your client is not going to stop tweeting out insane things every day?
Yeah, I would not. I mean, I think a bigger issue for him is there's we talk a lot about there's a certain base of the country that's on Team Trump, but there's also a pretty substantial portion of this country that views Donald Trump as an enemy of everything that America stands for. And frankly, I think a big reason why lawyers are not interested in signing up to be Donald Trump's lawyer is that he's a very controversial figure. There's a lot of clients who would not want to have Donald Trump's lawyer as their lawyer, and I think a lot of lawyers they don't want to make waves. They want to be somebody who can represent anyone. And this, the problems that Trump has are short-term problems, and there's a lot of clients out there who are going to be around a long time to come.
So, as a former federal prosecutor, I mean, is this Stormy Daniels thing that big of a deal? I mean, outside of the morality part of it, so he cheated with a porn star. That's probably the least of the problem, as most people think of him. Is this payment truly problematic for him? If he just came out and say, look, I paid it. It was what it was. Came out of my personal funds. It wasn't a campaign thing. It was just, here, shut up and go away. Is that problematic?
It's not nearly as problematic as some of the other things he's facing. The only candidate that I can think of who has been in a similar situation and faced charges was John Edwards, and I think that was widely considered to be a very aggressive charge. Ultimately, Edwards was not found guilty at trial. So, really, if Trump came out there and said, look, there are a lot of reasons why I wanted to keep this a secret, and the most important one is my wife, Melania, and I did not want her to know about this, I think it would have been a very difficult case for the government to bring. And really, the Stormy Daniels lawsuit is sort of, it's a non-issue. I mean, the whole lawsuit is being brought to, presumably let her tell her story, and she's been able to tell her story very well on everywhere from Saturday Night Live to, The View to 60 Minutes. And so, really the only danger for Trump there is having to sit for a deposition, and he could have potentially found a way either to resolve that case or, just try to make it as much of a non-issue as possible. Instead, he's really been feeding it. I mean, this is a case that's on hold, and yet, the president's lawyer is on TV trumpeting the case.
No, it's just a nuts. So the question then becomes: is this the better thing to focus on? Is this the better shiny thing, the better distraction than actually talking about what Mueller's investigating and what we could find out from there?
Well, certainly, there's a greater jeopardy for him in the Mueller investigation. I think particularly as to obstruction of justice. And, what we saw this morning was Trump really took a turn in terms of how he described obstruction of justice. He talked about how it's not obstruction, it's fighting back. And it's really kind of a tacit admission on his part that he's taken actions against the investigation. He's calling it fighting back. He's fighting back against the administration of justice. And, really, I think what he's banking on is the fact that, Mueller is almost certainly going to be presenting information for impeachment purposes rather than issuing an indictment of him. And, he is trying to politicize this investigation. So, if he takes the fifth and ultimately Mueller makes recommendations to Congress, that the Republicans will do nothing.
Oh, I don't think they'll do anything. I'll bet on that. But again, you look at this, and it just seems like they're muddying the waters constantly. And I point to the questions that evidently we now know Jay Sekulow wrote that for a while we were led to believe were Mueller's questions. And again, the only thing that I can come back to is you leak it out to make more of a circus, more of a distraction, to keep us completely off base.
Mm-hmm. Well, he is trying to turn the entire investigation into a circus. If he treated it with the sort of solemn, in the sort of solemn way that a typical person might treat an investigation like this, a typical president, I should say, would treat an investigation like this, then I think people would have more respect for the investigation. What he's trying to do is sort of foster a disrespect for the investigation on part of Republicans. And in many ways, Trump is acting like people who are under investigation do after they're charged. I mean, what's interesting to me is, typically before a prosecutor decides to bring charges, people who are under investigation usually are very nice to prosecutors because they want the prosecutor to decide that ultimately they are, not worthy of being charged. It's usually all the tacks and sharp elbows from the people under investigation usually don't come until after they're charged. What's interesting about Trump is he's already, begun to, launch those attacks against Mueller early, and I think part of that is because I think he feels fairly confident that at least as to obstruction that Mueller is going to conclude that he did.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Trump's lawyer, do you let him testify in front of Mueller?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't let him testify, period. I would tell him to take the fifth. And I think he's been laying the groundwork for that. I mean, he's really trying to politicize the investigation so that he has some sort of excuse not to testify.
So you weren't surprised when Rudy came out and said that he can't say that Trump won't take the fifth?
Yeah, I would be surprised if he didn't. I mean, what I expect is they're going to try to fight the subpoena up to the Supreme Court. They're going to lose, and then he's going to take the fifth because he's going to say that this is, quote, a witch hunt or whatever his excuse is. But, frankly, Trump is already facing I think an uphill battle on obstruction, to put it nicely. Really, his testimony can only make things worse for him. He's not going to have good answers to any of these questions. It's better for him not to answer them at all, and I expect that's what he's going to do.
See, I would like to see it. I'd like to see it on pay-per-view. I think it could help some of our national debt problems.
I bet you wouldn't be the only one, but I suspect this will be a circus rather than a show.
There you go. Don King can promote it. Last question I've got for you: what are you expecting coming out of the Mueller team this week? Anything in the near future that you see coming down?
I really don't. There's going to be, I don't think we'll see anything on obstruction until this issue of Trump's interview is resolved. If there's an indictment, there's certainly been no signs of it, although they've done a very good job, I'd say, of keeping things under wraps. And so really, I think we may be, entering a quiet period for some time, particularly as the election gets closer.
All right. It'll be interesting to see. Renato, I appreciate you taking time for us. Love to have you back real soon as this continues.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Good stuff. Renato Mariotti. Check out his stuff. Follow him on Twitter at Renato Mariotti. One of the people I absolutely follow when looking at this stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. Right back.
The first ones in line for that pie in the sky, and we're always the last when the crane is shed out. For the worker is working when the fat counts about. We're the first ones to stop. We're the first ones to die.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day animators struck Fleischer Studios in New York City. It was the industry's first strike. Creators of Popeye the Sailor Man and Betty Boop were fed up with working conditions at Fleischer. They were sick of the long hours, low pay, no paid sick leave, or even vacation time. Some had worked years without a day off. As well, they resented having to ask permission to use the bathroom. Animation workers wanted better working conditions and medical insurance. 2 animators had recently died of tuberculosis, and workers linked their deaths to poor ventilation in the studio. They had been trying to organize with the Commercial Artists and Designers Union for over a year. 2 leading animators were fired for union activity a month earlier, and another 13 were fired when the union approached the studio demanding their reinstatement, union recognition, wage increases, and benefits. In his book, Drawing the Line, Tom Cito writes that picketers were soon marching on Broadway singing, "We're Popeye the Union Man. We'll fight to the finish because we can't live on spinach." One picket sign read, "I make millions laugh, but the real joke is my salary." Strikers received support from the Screen Actors Guild. The Musicians Union refused to provide soundtracks for the studio, and many union projectionists refused to show Fleischer cartoons across the country. The AFL organized a boycott of Paramount Pictures, which financed the studio, and Ariel Longshoreman frequently joined the picket lines. After 5 months, the studio finally caved, granting the strikers' demands. But the victory was short-lived. Fleischer made moves to relocate to Florida within a year, in part to bust their union. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. You know, it's almost a cliche at this point when you look at what Trump's been doing. You know, a bunch of rich guys at a country club huddled naked in a steam room, plotting and scheming. It's you got to wonder, you know, how secure are our nation's golf courses? Are we figuring out how that the spies from all around the world are not bugging every golf course in the area? Especially when you got Rudy going on Sunday to talk about, you know, how wonderful his day of blathering went. And you just go, I don't know. I don't know. And this is another one of those moments where you go, just tell the truth. Everyone thinks Trump's a vile character anyway. And when this whole Stormy Daniels thing hit, I said, just come out and say, yep, paid it. Just to make her go away. You know, go, nothing happened. These kind of frivolous things happen to us all the time. We did it. And be done with it. Let it go. But no. You gotta, it's always the lie. It's always the lie. And that's what I tell my kids. And, you know, hopefully at some point, my kids are smarter than a 71-year-old president. In that they go, you know what? It's always the lie. You know, okay, I broke the lamp. Sorry. Apologize. Or, you know, whatever. Don't lie. Because you're always going to get caught. Always going to get caught. And you look at all of this push towards discrediting the Mueller investigation, all of the talk of firings. Interestingly enough, even Nikki Haley is saying that the process should go through its course, that it shouldn't be ended, that, you know, look, it's got to run its course. She said, "Good for the country, for the good of the country, this investigation needs to happen quickly." And I agree. This investigation needs to happen as quickly as possible. But that means not rushing through it just to get through it. It means getting through it and getting it right. And this is the thing that I think is important. You know, you have some of these conservative commentators who are out there, you know, running around screaming that, oh, it's just a big witch hunt, and that, you know, none of this is important. There's no obstruction. I go, well, I don't know about you, but I want to know what the truth is. And one guy, you know, said, well, it's all about Hillary Clinton. It's not about Hillary Clinton. I don't care who won or lost the election at this point. I want to know, and it comes back to the Nixon question. We got to know if our president's a crook. We got to know if he's a liar, if he's a cheat. We got to know if he's a con man. We got to know if he's a Russian asset. I want the truth, not alternative facts, not various versions of reality. I want the truth. It's that simple to me. The truth. How hard? Got to get to the bottom of it. Want to know exactly what they were doing, when they were doing it, and how they were doing it. And do they have secret back channels that they're working with the Russians that our government doesn't, that we the people don't know about? Understand, the president's not a king. Donnie wants to be a king. Not here. You're still accountable and answerable to Congress. You're accountable and answerable to we the people. I don't think that's difficult to understand. So when you ask a question, you should get an answer. There should be some accountability. And sadly, the Republicans have given him cover. And I also have to keep coming back to the question of, you know, how many of them are knee deep in this as well, or eyeball deep, or in over their head. Devin Nunes, just kind of throwing that out. Now, I do find it interesting that that Reince Priebus was on Fox on Sunday morning. And he says, I'm not spinning for the president. I don't work for the president anymore. And when asked about the Stormy Daniels money, the hush money, he said, I'm not sure what the truth is. This is Reince Priebus, former head of the RNC, former chief of staff of Donald. Don't know what the truth is. I don't know if we actually know yet what the truth of it is. Myself, I don't know anything about it. I love how he clears himself at the end there. I don't know. I wasn't there. Leave me out of this debacle. He's probably the happiest guy of any of them to have been one of the first out the door. Because when all of it comes down, and I do think it will eventually all come steaming down the hill. He's setting up the defensive, the Sergeant Schultz defense. I know nothing. I know nothing. I think you're going to see a lot of that. And I think at some point even Trump himself will do that. But, as I watched Rudy over the weekend, I kept coming back to a couple of things. Either one, it would be better to have Manny, Mo, and Jack, or Larry, Curly, and Mo, or, whomever, anybody but Rudy, as he let revelation after revelation out. Well, it might take the fifth. Oh, it wasn't a campaign. Yeah, he paid it. Until that point, they had never admitted that they paid it. In fact, the video that has circulated a number of times is of Trump going, I don't know what you're talking about. Now, as I've said in the past, I understand when you shove a microphone in a man's face who's been cheating on his wife, he is going to lie 100% of the time. There is not a man on this planet, and I don't care how pious you are, I don't care how religious you are, I don't care how good and upstanding you think you are, and I don't care even if you put your hand on the Bible while shoving the microphone in your face, even if it was Mike Pence with his hand on the Bible, he would lie if he was cheating on his wife. For a whole bunch of reasons. One, you don't want to lose half of your stuff, or in most cases all of it. And two, you don't want to hurt that person. And yet we keep doing this. And well, maybe the other side of it is maybe Donald shouldn't have done it. So there is that. But I keep coming back to the Cohen raid. How many more of these are out there? How much more is there? Because understand, this is a guy who was, he was Donald Trump. You listen to some of the stories that other celebrities have been letting out. This was not an isolated incident. He used to go to the to Hef's house there, and there were bunnies everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a trail of hush money. And while this is kind of the distraction, it does show again, the operations of this guy. And it shows how he operates. But I come back to the Mueller thing. And with all of this distraction, we've kind of left Mueller and that all alone. And the hope is that, well, one, the Mueller investigation can continue. We don't see a firing of Rosenstein or Mueller. But two, they wrap this up sometime before the midterm so that voters will have the ability to say, you know what? We want to know who was involved in all of this and hold those people accountable. Because this midterm election, this is an important one. This is us figuring out how to take back some of our government. This is us figuring out how we undo the damage this administration has already done. This is us undoing really the harm that Trump and his minions are bringing us. And to me, it starts at the judiciary. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
With this latest reckless decision, the EPA did not just jeopardize our planet and our health, they also broke the law.
17 states sue Trump administration over rollback of car emissions standards.
This is a worst-case scenario for government ethics. I feel like I want my head to explode right now.
More new ethics problems for EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. Pakistan sets all-time world heat record for the month of April. Plus, Russia launches the world's first floating nuclear power plant.
Fantastic. What could possibly go wrong? All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We aren't killing our planet. Let us face it. There is no planet B.
Yes, there is. It's called Mars, and Elon Musk is going to fly us there, and we will all be eating Matt Damon's poop potatoes. Okay?
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, Scott Pruitt used to brag about the fact that he had sued the EPA 14 different times. Well, I guess what comes around goes around.
Yes, it certainly does. A coalition of 17 states and the District of Columbia filed suit against the Trump Environmental Protection Agency on Tuesday, arguing that the administration's attempt to weaken Obama-era fuel economy and emissions standards for cars and trucks is against the law. The states, led by California, allege the rollback is arbitrary and unsupported by evidence and would increase health care costs and climate change impacts. In a press conference, California's Democratic Governor Jerry Brown was characteristically blunt.
He's breaking the law. He's flouting the Clean Air Act and the legitimate needs and well-being of the American people. This is about health. It's about life and death. Pruitt, and I suppose his boss, Mr. Trump, they want people to buy more gas, create more pollution. Hard to believe, but that's the fact.
The 17 states represent 44% of U.S. car sales. Governor Brown and some auto industry analysts warn that weakening the standards could hamstring the U.S. auto industry because the rest of the world is transitioning to cleaner cars and trucks.
Which means they're going to be able to sell a lot more cars, and the U.S. auto industry is going to be caught out again.
More troubles for EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. 2 of his top aides resigned this week related to Pruitt's questionable spending and ethics. Now, new reports reveal that Pruitt's exorbitantly costly trip to Morocco last year was actually organized by a lobbyist who was then subsequently hired by Morocco to lobby the U.S. government.
Nice.
Former federal ethics chief Walter Schaub told CNN,
"It's inconceivable in any other administration that he'd still be in this position, particularly because the whole point of the trip seems to have been to promote natural gas industry interests, and it's really not clear what an EPA administrator has to do with that."
Well, it depends if that EPA administrator is Scott Pruitt and has been funded for years by the fossil fuel industry.
And now the Washington Post reports that a billionaire who advised Trump on deregulation has himself received a special exemption from regulation. The EPA this week quietly granted billionaire Carl Icahn a special financial hardship waiver worth millions of dollars that exempts an oil refinery he owns from renewable fuel blending regulations. Icahn was forced to step down as a Trump advisor last year amid corruption allegations that he was using his position to benefit his investments.
Billionaire Carl Icahn got a hardship waiver
for a profitable refinery.
Poor guy.
Meanwhile, the impacts of global warming caused by burning fossil fuels continue to accelerate. Pakistan on April 30th hit 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if confirmed, that would be a new world record for the hottest April temperature ever reliably recorded on the entire planet.
Wow.
But some good news for breathers. New York City this week announced plans to electrify their entire bus fleet by 2040. Even better news, Shenzhen, China announced it has already converted its entire fleet of 13,000 buses to electric, and they did it in just 3 years. In Hawaii, a bipartisan, unanimous vote in the state legislature made Hawaii the first state in the nation to commit to 100% renewable electricity and a statewide net zero carbon emissions economy by 2045.
Nice.
And finally, Russia has launched the world's first floating nuclear power plant, and it's headed on a very slow barge to the Arctic, where it will begin operations sometime next year. It's part of a planned fleet of floating nuke plants that Greenpeace warns could cause Chernobyl on ice.
Not as nice. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. We'll be off for the next week, but we'll be back thereafter. Until then, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Ice, ice, baby. Ice, ice, baby. All right, stop.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So Diamonds and Silk, you know, the Tesla-liars in front of Congress lying that they didn't get money from the Trump administration and who knows where else. But they tweeted out the other day that, quote, so a porn star can lay on her back, collect a check, and ignore a signed contract based on her lying facts, then come back and extort more money to add to her check, while the very fake news do jumping jacks, such a load of, you know what, malarkey, sue for breach of contract. And my response to that was, these are children of the pious. These are children of the hyper-religious. Pop quiz for all the Christians in the room. How many of the 10 Commandments have the God-fearing Christian Trump-lupicans have ignored while putting this out? Here to talk about that and also what's going on in Washington, D.C., our good friend Isaiah Poole. Isaiah is the founder of Poole Media. Isaiah, thanks for taking time for us.
It's totally my pleasure.
How many of the commandments have the Diamond and Silk seem to ignore? The lying, the cheating, the adultery. How many of them are there?
You know, and not to mention that there shall not be any other gods before me. Which, if you're wearing, you know, one of these America First slogans, that there's a violation there. That's violation number one. America is not first. For those of us who are steeped in the faith.
Yeah, I mean, as I was looking at this and I'm going, did we miss something? Is the evangelical community, is the Christian community, are they just lost?
Well, listen, there is a very vigorous debate in the evangelical community over that very question. Right now I'm was just looking up something that Franklin Graham said a couple of days ago, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but it was something to the effect, if I quote him correctly, is that the Stormy Daniels affair really doesn't matter, or is none of our business. I think it's more like what he said. And that sort of astounds me as a person who has been subjected to evangelical questions being all in my business when it comes to issues like marriage equality, sexual orientation, things like that. I mean, I think I can't imagine there's hardly a gay person in the United States who would be happy knowing that after all of these decades of the Christian right trying to legislate morality, that all of a sudden, when it comes to Donald Trump, his morality doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite amazing, especially if, just real quick, short history lesson. If you remember back during the Clinton years, they were ready to string him up.
Oh, yeah, well, exactly. Monica Lewinsky for what was egregious behavior. I mean, you should not be, messing around with a White House intern. But, we have, now we have this issue of payments and whether there were election laws that were being violated, all of that. And in the midst of a much larger scandal that involves a foreign government tampering with our election. I mean, not to mention the other unethical and immoral actions being taken by this administration.
Yeah. No, I mean, and again, that's, to me, all of the distraction. All of this, all the Stormy stuff is the shiny thing to get us away from how horrible this administration has been. And I don't know if you saw Trump's speech the other day in front of the NRA, but evidently he has caught the ire of French officials when he said that if someone in France had had a gun, it'd been a whole different scenario. If the people of France were as well armed as we are, it would have never happened.
I really make a practice of not watching NRA speeches generally, especially if Donald Trump is the speaker.
I hear you.
So in fact, I did miss that. But the truth of the matter is, and this is the thing, and I've said this before, if we really actually took a look at what happens in other countries around the world, we would not be so high and mighty when it comes to our own record regarding
healthcare,
violence, or healthcare, or any of the other issues. I mean, and actually, you mentioned healthcare. I mean, the reality is that gun control is a healthcare issue, particularly when you look at the number of times guns are used in suicide, the number of times that guns are used in domestic violence issues. Yeah, so there are nasty stabbings that happen in places like London and in France. I would take that any day over the fear of a semi-automatic rifle being used in a hotel. And in fact, I would take that mainly because of what is happening to young black men around the country when you have a police force that now expects or assumes that black men are carrying weapons, carrying guns.
I've said for a long time, if you want to get the NRA off of their stance, arm every black person in the country.
Yeah, but here's the thing. And actually, I tell you something.
And I used to say that until the Castro guy, Philandro Castro in Minnesota, because he was a legal gun owner. He was a good guy with a gun who was, in my view, executed.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Yesterday, a 21-year-old friend of mine he showed me a cigarette lighter that was in the shape of a gun, tiny gun.
I've seen them.
Yeah, you've seen them. I told him stop carrying it because I was immediately, and I told him and I reminded him about all of the incidents in which young black men have been killed for carrying less than a gun-shaped cigarette lighter. The kid that was out that was in his backyard by the time police found him, he was in his own home. He was basically in the backyard of his grandmother's home, and all he was doing was reaching for a cell phone. He was shot down by police, who had assumed that he was carrying a weapon. Now, that assumption that we're all packing heat is one of the factors that exacerbates the kind of violence that we have, that police officers are using against in communities of color.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is where it's I get that well, they're all packing heat. So if that's the case, then why aren't we shooting a bunch of a bunch of these skinheads with the Confederate flag tattoos?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm not trying to say that racism isn't a factor. It very much is.
No, it is that's my point. It's the factor. How is it that the kid who does the shooting ends up, that the one who did the Charleston shooting? How is it they took him without incident? He's still around. He killed a bunch of people. You knew he had guns.
I've made the same point about the incident in Toronto, where the situation where the guy used a truck to mow down a bunch of pedestrians, and he was basically taken down without a shot.
Well, that's Canada. I mean, I don't know that they have all the same problems that we have. I'm sure they have their share of them.
Yeah, but what that. I just raised that up as a model of what's possible.
Right.
Police. There are ways that you could do policing correctly, and actually here in the District of Columbia, one of the good things that the mayor has asked the Metropolitan Police Department officers to do, and the police chief people to do, is to study African American history and to study the history of interactions between African Americans and police, during the Civil Rights Movement and elsewhere, so that police have a context of understanding structural racism and understand what is in the mind of an African American person when a police officer approaches them. And if a police officer has that basic understanding, they can do their policing job differently, without and do it by overcoming that what would otherwise be this bias that creeps in.
And I would argue by mandating having the police live in the neighborhood in which they're policing would not be a bad idea either.
Oh, I agree with that. We have too many of our police officers live outside the city. And, we've tried to do some things here in the district to ameliorate that. But, we still have a lot of officers who live in the suburbs. And one of the things we need to do about that is make sure that there's housing that they can afford in the city, which is part of the problem.
So, but how is it that, D.C. has one of the highest poverty rates? I mean, you're talking about mass inequality, obviously. Obviously, you have really, really expensive areas and then really, really poor areas. Those are the areas I think I want them living in.
Well, yeah.
I mean, because shouldn't the policemen be people from the community? I mean, isn't that?
Yeah, police officers should be people from the community, and what we really should be focused on is making sure that every community is livable. And frankly, having police officers living in all of the community, all throughout the city, would really help to make that happen. But we need a supply of decent, affordable housing, and right now we do not have enough decent, affordable housing. Period.
Now, is that just a D.C. problem, or do you see that in metropolitan cities across the country?
It's a nationwide problem. I mean, when I talk to folks in San Francisco, when I talk to folks in New York City, some of these other cities, they all tell me the same thing, that, in these areas, that particularly in cities that are on a really strong revival, whether it's because of Silicon Valley, which is what's happened in the West Coast, or it's just the confluence of like here in Washington, I think there are multiple factors that have contributed to the gentrification here in D.C. just by the fact that, we have a generation of people who just prefer living in the city. But, it's created incredible stresses on affordable housing. And, if we're going to ask our police and our teachers, that's another category of people who should be living inside the city, if we're going to ask them to do that, then we've got to make that, we have to have the housing stock that makes that possible.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. Let me ask you last line.
And I'm going to say, if Diamond and Silk came back to where we started, if Diamond and Silk were really concerned about African American people, one of the things they need to do is talk to their boy Ben Carson. But I don't think they're going to do that.
Dr. Triple.
Because he's not, he's walking us backwards on issues of humane housing for low-income people, fair housing. I mean, he even threatening to take diversity out of the mission statement of HUD. I mean, it's mostly bad coming out of HUD, and it's just inexplicable.
Yeah, I mean, for as bad as Betsy DeVos is, as bad as Scott Pruitt is, as bad as Rick Perry's been, go down the list. Zinke, Carson's the guy who's kind of gotten away. He's flown under the radar because half the time, if you listen to him, you fall asleep.
Yeah.
But he's doing some really horrible things. I mean, you just throw out that first thing of, he wants to triple the amount that poor people are paying for rent. If they don't have the money to pay for what they've got now, how are they going to pay 3 times what they're paying now?
Yeah, and very few people have called him on it, and it's inexplicable to me. I think one of the reasons why Carson has flown under the radar is because we generally have paid insufficient attention to the work that HUD does, even in Democratic administration.
There's a point.
Yeah, and that the agency has been under siege for years, and we just haven't focused attention on it. But I think now, given the severe, extreme inequality that we're seeing in places like D.C., New York, San Francisco, Seattle, we got to do that.
It's going to be interesting to see. Last question I've got for you. The president tweeted out this morning about Gina Haspel. I wanted to get some of your thoughts. We'll call her Gina Waterboarder. Evidently, she's going to be on Capitol Hill today, making her case to be the next CIA director. Any thoughts?
I number one, I don't know a lot about Gina Haspel. I mean, obviously, I know the controversy. I don't know what's in her heart, what I do know is that I frankly would not trust anyone in an administration in which the President of the United States does not believe that waterboarding is a big deal, is not committed to the idea of not using torture against combatants. I mean, I think if it's okay, if the president thinks that torture is okay, if the president thinks that waterboarding is okay, if the president is not prepared to take a stand, the kind of stand, principled stand that most leadership in the military has come to, in terms the stuff is just not even effective, much less morally right, then why should I trust a Gina Haspel?
Good point. There you go. Do you think she gets confirmed, even with Rand Paul's opposition?
Probably.
All right.
Probably.
I love the defeatism.
Again, I think I keep my mantra is 2018, November 2018. That's my mantra.
There it is. Good stuff. Isaiah, I appreciate the time, man.
All right.
Our good friend Isaiah Poole, founder of Poole Media. Good guy. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1907. That was the day known in the San Francisco labor movement as Bloody Tuesday. In the early 20th century, San Francisco was a city with a strong union movement. In early May, the Carmen's Union called a strike against United Railroads, the company that ran the city's transit system. 1,500 Carmen walked off the job, demanding an 8-hour workday and a $3 per day wage. The strike began on a Sunday. The city's transit lines stood silent. The next day, tensions began to mount. The company put up barbed wire around the car barns. Strikers believed this was in preparation to get the streetcars back up and running. Strikers and supporters gathered around the car barns. The day passed with nothing happening. But the next morning, as picketers gathered, 6 cars rolled out of the barns. Hired guns rode with the scab drivers. Angry picketers attempted to stop the streetcars, bombarding them with bricks and stones. Gunfire erupted between the armed company guards and the picketers. 2 picketers were killed in the hail of gunfire. Many more were injured. But this bloody day was not the end of the injuries. It's estimated that 24 people were killed in accidents while scab drivers operated the streetcars. Strikes by public transportation workers were often some of the most contested work actions to take place in big cities. These workers had the ability to impact work sites far beyond their own, since they transported laborers to work. The magnitude of a transportation strike would ripple throughout a city, and these strikes were often met with fierce resistance. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
From UN.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out my website, thericksmithshow.com. So my favorite tweet of the day thus far, Rare Logic tweets out, why hire lawyers when he can get the best strategies from a variety of legal experts on CNN, MSNBC, NBC Politics, CBS, ABC. He forgot fake news over at Fox. He points out that during the campaign, he received more free press than any other candidate. He lives for the media, and he can exploit it. My God, he's a brand. Yeah, welcome to the show. He is a brand and has been for a very long time, which is why he slaps his names on things, and people pay him for it. He is a brand. The problem is our media was gaga over him, and oh, by the way, made tons of money off of him. Les Moonves was quite apt when he said, look, I don't really care about him. He's just making us tons of money, because viewership was up. And there's part of me that goes, we as citizens of this country look to the game, look to the match as it's a horse race. You hear it all the time about, it's a horse race down to the finish line. It's like team sport mentality. My team's going to win, without really talking about the issues. And Trump was that guy. He had no issue. He had no issues whatsoever. He threw out a bunch of platitudes. He was, you talk about trade. He had no idea how he's going to get where he's going to get. And this is where Hillary lost. She was studious and came out with 50-page plans, and if you went to her website, there was a position paper on everything. She came out with and said exactly what she was going to do on everything with copious amounts of verbiage, and we don't read, so it was all lost on us. What we got were what Trump understood much better than Hillary: 6-second sound bites. Master of the soundbite. And our media just lapped it up. So are we surprised that, you've got a reality show TV president? No. You knew it was coming. We've been talking about this for years. The dumbing down of the American electorate. The hope is now that this has made us wake up and go, we've tried. It's failing. let's not do it again. Just kind of a thought. Just kind of throwing that out there for the future, so that when you go to the polls in November, you actually ask hard questions about, hey, what are you going to do? What are your positions? What do you think about X, Y, or Z? How are you going to solve the healthcare problem? How are we going to get wages to raise? How are we going to make sure that, kids get the education that they need? There's a lot of questions for this era candidate that we didn't bother to ask Donald Trump. And look, Hillary was a terrible candidate. I don't care what anybody says. She had 30 years of baggage that no candidate in history has ever had to carry. She was saddled from the beginning with stuff she could not change. 2020 will be a different year. And the hope is that candidate won't have that kind of baggage. That's simple in my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, telling me what you think, what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear it. If you agree, disagree, love to hear that as well. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed today's program, get the podcast over at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show.